show, everybody on YouTube. Thanks for waiting that little bit extra. We were just trying to tweak some sound settings because me and Sammy are sat in the same room right now, right? So we were trying to get our headphones to place. You know, you don't need to know that. Anyway, we're live at last. We're always late anyway, fashionably late. So there you go, we're back. Tom, say hello.
Hello all.
What's the time for you?
5:18 a.m. Saturday morning.
Nice. And what you were just saying before we went on, it's like a heat wave at the minute in Wuhan, right?
It's just like the second summer starts, it just goes ridiculous here. Like I've been told it's going to get about 10 degrees hotter, but it's currently about 31 right now. At 5 in the morning. Hotter. Yeah, it gets to about 40 degrees here at the peak of summer. So I apologise in advance if anyone can hear my fan as background noise, but that's non-negotiable.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you have tons of fans, Tom. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, it's my only fan, Sammy. It's my only fan.
Okay, God. I can't hear it anyway, so it's all good. But anyway,
alright, cool.
Thanks for joining us. It's such an early hour. We're getting up like always. Sammy, you're sat next to me, but say hello.
Hello, everyone. Fran is a psycho. He uses light mode.
I don't use light mode. It's just that one page was in light mode, Sammy, and as soon as you saw it, you started like
your Telegram is in light mode.
You started like wincing like a vampire. Yeah. Seeing the light.
By the way, also, I can talk normally now because I'm not in a blooming house share where I'll hear thudding every 5 seconds because I'm talking at night.
Well, that's the bad side of being a streamer in a house share that's not a YouTube house, right?
Yeah. Not living the high life exactly, am I?
Well, no, it's good to have you here. Like, actually, this is the first time we've done a show. Look, why didn't we do a show when like all four of us were together that time? I don't know why we didn't. We missed that opportunity.
That would have been a perfect opportunity, to be fair. But exactly. The amount of fucking sound problems we probably would have had would have negated the facility of it.
Well, we did it like MacGyvered it, like we have done.
Here
we go. Skulking Skunk says in Chicago it's like 45 and raining. Do you mean 45 Fahrenheit, right? Like we're in Europe,
should clarify.
Right?
I mean
Celsius. You mean Celsius?
China also
as well?
uses Celsius. Yeah, 30 degrees Celsius. I think that's like 110. Is it in Fahrenheit? I don't know. I don't speak Yank.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the difference. It's bad, really.
I'll Google it.
The UK is not weird. You use Celsius.
We use Celsius.
But on the other half of measurements, you use them in like stones and miles and that.
It's weird, isn't it? It's like half good, half old school
half
still.
Rubbish,
Yeah.
So 31 degrees Celsius is 87.8 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow. Yeah, Skulking Skunk. Do you mean in Chicago? Do you mean Fahrenheit or Celsius? Because 45C is intense. What's 45F, Tom, in C? If that makes sense.
It's too early for these calculations.
Like 18
I'm here for 7. 7 Celsius.
Chat saying multiply by 9.5 and add 32.
Look, as I say, I'm here for fucking geopolitics, not mathematics. I'm not doing that shit at 5 in the morning. Do your own maths.
If you're listening though, drop the current temperature of where you are in the chat, preferably in Celsius, and we'll compare them. Sammy, have you posted the show on Telegram?
Yeah.
Is it getting some hits?
I don't know. 12 people are watching, I think.
Make it get some hits. 13 viewers. If you're watching as well, make sure you smash like, right? There's only 10 likes and 30 people watching, so some of you need to catch up. Right, anyway,
come on.
It's good to be back, right?
Piss poor. Sorry, go on.
It's good to be back.
Yeah.
Anyway, what are we going to talk about this week? We got no plan coming into this show.
Well,
but what's been going on?
I posted about it a few minutes ago on the Telegram, and it turned out that the supposed Saudi private jet that arrived in Aden International Airport, which is like the capital of the puppet government in Yemen at the moment. Sana'a is the revolutionary government. So the plane that arrives carrying Yemeni allegedly prisoners of war like as a handover. It turns out they were deported Yemeni workers and not prisoners of war. So at the moment, the Sana'a government of Ansarullah are issuing quite a fiery statement about this. What's the correct word for this?
Were they meant
Repatriation?
Or like not repatriation. Like at first they said there was going to be prisoners of war, releasing prisoners of war as a part of the agreements and the ceasefire.
Right.
But it turned out they deported a few workers and that was it.
Well, they just switched them for workers instead of
Prisoners of war.
POWs.
No, they didn't switch them. They literally said that they were sending over prisoners of war.
Oh, so the prisoners of war don't even exist. They just called them that.
Yeah, well, they do exist, but instead of sending them back to Yemen, like handing them over, they just deported a few workers and sent them to Yemen instead of the prisoners of war.
Legal workers or illegal workers?
Legal workers, as far as I know.
Well, that's insane, right?
Yeah.
So what's the repercussion of that? You said Yemen is
quite-
releasing a statement. Is that happening right now?
It is happening. It happened a few minutes ago. I haven't had a look at it, but in a nutshell, it basically looks quite fiery. Like they were saying, Saudi's putting on this facade and whatnot. But yeah, while you two do talking, I'll just have a quick read through that.
I mean, why would they act so? Like, it's stupid, isn't it?
I mean, this. If you look at it,
How are you going to get away with that, right?
Honestly, no. Honestly, it's kind of hard to explain because logically, if you were to look at it from the surface, like this whole war on Yemen thing, it doesn't make sense at all. Yeah, but you've got possibly the most revolutionary country in the region, in the Arab region or the so-called Middle East. They want to keep this underdeveloped, impoverished, especially considering it's quite a good fair amount of oil reserves. And considering that Yemen is a significant part of the axis of resistance, comprising factions in Lebanon, Iraq, then at the state level you have Syria and Iran, as well as factions in Palestine, of course. It's very important for them to keep Yemen subdued as much as possible, which is not exactly working out in their favour, considering they're getting hammered every few months or few
And especially
weeks.
by doing that, though, like what you're going to try and subjugate someone. You can't constantly like taunt them, can you? And not expect a pushback. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, here's some prisoner of. Oh no, they're just deported. Like it's like that's like Scooby-Doo style moves, isn't it? Like, did you honestly expect to get away with that?
I honestly
I know
but yeah, go on.
I know Qatar does. I'm not too sure about Saudi Arabia, but I presume so, considering it's a Gulf monarchy. But like, Qatar uses like slave labor almost from like the surrounding countries for
lot
their
of
like
them do,
infrastructure
really.
projects and stuff. Yeah, so wouldn't surprise me if Kingdom of Saudi Arabia were to do the same, and these are probably like some kind of essentially bonded slave workers or something that have just been sent home to kind of, I don't know, make up the quota or whatever.
To give the viewers a bit of an idea, a sneak peek of what these contracts in the Gulf monarchies involve, is basically one of the many things. The workers arrive in the country, whether it's like South Asian workers. They take their passports away, and they can only leave the country if they get permission from their boss, from their work boss.
Mm. And they're paid something like $7 a week or something ridiculous as well. Like that's how it's justified calling them.
Yeah, and we're about to have a
Sorry.
World Cup though that's been like built by slaves, and like how many workers have died? There's like an unknown amount of workers that have
I
died.
think it's in the thousands.
That have died in the creation of these stadiums that we're going to see matches at in like only a few months.
Yeah.
And they'll just brush it under the cover. So how many other projects? That's probably the norm, isn't it? If with cases like this, the way I see it is if the World Cup can produce news like that, what's going on the building sites that you don't hear anything about, right? They're arguably going to be in a worse state than the World Cup stadiums, right? That's probably the tip of the iceberg in terms of how bad workers are treated in these places. It's ridiculous.
And what's funny is as well, like, one of the initial sanctions against Russia was the banning of them from all international sporting competitions, including the World Cup. So it's like, we'll ban Russia for killing Nazis, but we'll but we'll literally let the host state kill thousands of slave workers to build the stadium in which the actual
that was in the same week
take place.
The same week that Saudi Arabia just had the F1 as well, right?
Possibly.
Same week, the same week they were. I mean, there've been that conspiracy against Russian sporting bodies for a long time, haven't there? With all that, like, not letting them. There's been the last 2 Olympics now, hasn't it, that they've not been able to compete under the name Russia. They can't have their anthem and all them stitch-ups.
But this almost like cultural isolation of Russia, not just economic, and this basically raising a very second iron curtain. Some elements in the U.S. State Department, some of the bureaucracy there, said that they are currently studying the technicalities of applying the same thing, but to the PRC, to China. And that's, like, in my opinion, their preparation for, like, the next step, which is, like, decoupling from China, so to speak, emerging into this new multipolar world, because they're already doing it with Russia, and they are studying the idea or the prospects of doing the same thing with China. Because if you look at import, trade, export movement, it's significantly slowed down from China, and, like, prices gone up and stuff. Apart from, like, the brief trade war that happened between the US.
Just to go into that a little bit more in depth, a large reason why the trade has kind of ground to a halt at the minute is because of the Shanghai lockdown, which has kind of driven Chinese exports way down over the past 2 months. This is not like a criticism of the lockdown or anything, because China obviously cares more about the lives of their citizens and the zero COVID policy than they do about economic growth. But the difference between decoupling from China and decoupling from Russia is, like, even the vast majority of the American bourgeoisie kind of look at China and acknowledge that a complete decoupling from China would lead to a collapse in all of their supply chains and in every industry pretty much, and basically a worldwide recession like we've never seen before, like that would make the 1920s look like nothing, kind of thing. Whereas with Russia, I mean, like, the decoupling from Russia is kind of that already causes, like, huge tremors around the world, economic tremors, as the different countries, like, race to replace Russian imports of hard products, gases, oils, raw materials. But the USA can kind of carve a niche out there because they are an exporter of oil, so they can, it's not practical, but, like, they can sacrifice the EU's economy. They can still win out, but they can't win in a trade war with China. We've already seen that with what Trump tried.
And that's kind of
so
what
I think,
we
like,
said. Sorry to interrupt there, but that's pretty much what we said about a month and a half, 2 months ago, in one of the pinned messages on Telegram, which is the analysis and what we think that how this new multipolar world is going to emerge. We said that they're going to aim to hurt China like right after they deal with Russia, pretty much. They're gonna sacrifice the EU, not just sacrifice the EU, but, like, weaken it, and kind of just sacrifice Eastern Europe back into quote-unquote Russian sphere of influence. And we've been kind of seeing that slowly with the Baltic states somewhat, but also countries like Moldova, I believe it was. But yeah, we're slowly seeing, like, more war hawkishness towards China after this, saying, we're studying the technicalities of how to do the same thing with China, etc., etc.
That's the thing, though. Like,
I think what we basically said in that pinned message is happening slowly in front of us as the days or the weeks go past.
I mean, I think the thing with China is, like, Deng Xiaoping was obviously one of the most forward-thinking. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear him.
Oh, it's just...
Carry on, Tom.
Deng Xiaoping was like one of the most forward-thinking men ever in modern history, and kind of predicted like how important China could be to the USA and to the world economy if it supplanted itself in basically every supply chain in the world, which is what happened with the Geiger Kaifang, the opening up and reform. And we're now seeing the kind of ramifications of that, whereas Russia has never been integrated into the world economy. Like the USSR and the Iron Curtain was
Modern economy, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, like the USSR
Post-Bolshevik world, they've never been integrated.
The USSR kind of had its own economy with its, with its Iron Curtain states, and the West had its own freedom and democracy economy that operated independently. And China kind of managed to come in at the end when the USSR was falling to pieces and said, okay, well, we're going to supplant ourselves into the Western economy and make ourselves an integral part of it. And I think that's one of the reasons why the USA and others were kind of duped into thinking they'd won with China, and that China would, eventually join them and become one of these neoliberal fucking periphery puppet states.
I mean, it wasn't far off.
But
it wasn't far off.
It
right?
was. Yeah, of course, there's plenty of times when that could have happened. I mean, the most glaring one is obviously 1989. But again, Deng Xiaoping and his forward-thinking,
even just
third eye.
Just look at the way. Because like 2008 games is used, isn't it, as like a cudgel to create this myth that since China was at the point of opening up to the world, and the 2008 Olympics was meant to be this moment where China fully opened up, and what actually happened is evil Xi Jinping took over, right, and ruined every. Like that's the. You don't even have to go back to 1989 anymore. You can just go to 2008. The way they talk about it, So
I think like if China was on continued on the path it was on in 2008, then yeah, there's very much a chance that it could have fallen into the Western camp. But the thing is, like, I think the most evident kind of attempt of the West to try and force China to do it was 1989, and that was why it had to be defeated so comprehensively and swiftly by the party. Whereas like with Xi Jinping, he just came in and kind of like went, okay, no more corruption, and just arrested a load of corrupt officials. And
it's basically the same, wasn't it?
Sort of, yeah, but like
changed to the point
slow
where
slow motion is.
History had just changed in the way that things were reported, so they couldn't make such a big song and dance about it as they could. Like, it's 1989, the West basically made it into a cultural event, didn't they? Like, Western socialist parties still celebrate it like it's not celebrate it, but mark it, don't they? Like it's a cultural event. Do you know what I mean? Whereas so you don't see Trotskyists go on this day in 2014, Xi Jinping arrested billionaire such and such in anti-corruption. It's just not reported in the same way. Do you know what I'm saying? That myth behind it's not there. Sammy, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on my point I was talking about a few minutes ago. I just pulled up the post we put out on Telegram a few months ago. One point saying, in the harming Russia, they will attempt to use, they obviously being the imperialists and the US, they will attempt to use the entirety of Eastern Europe to do so, which will lead to the loss of the Baltic states and Eastern Europe back into Russia's so-called sphere of influence. We're seeing that right now with Hungary, as today, I believe it was, or yesterday, Hungarian Prime Minister Orban, he went on like basically state media or state radio, expressing his absolute refusal to ban Russian gas.
Yeah. There's a few countries that have done that, isn't there? Czech Republic, Hungary, somebody else. Someone will say in the chat. There's a few.
I think Czech Republic actually is pro embargo.
No. There's at least 3 or 4, and I believe Czech Republic is on that list. So they might be pro embargo, right? But there becomes a point where they go, "Oh,
we'll be shooting ourselves in the foot."
Yeah. Oh, by embargo you meant total ban? Oh no, I didn't mean that. Do you know what I mean? I thought you were just gonna give us a solution or whatever. But more and more countries are starting to fall against it. I don't know if it's confirmed, but I heard something the other week that like Poland had ordered government buildings to start taking down Ukraine flags because they were done supporting, standing with or whatever. Right?
It's about time the hospital I've been in work at still has a Ukraine flag outside its main door. Like, why?
I think the Polish are kind of the last vassals of kind of severe Western influence within Eastern Europe. Like you hear all these stories about the Polish going into Ukraine and acting as peacekeepers, which Russia's already said they would basically treat as an act of war, and they would engage Russian peacekeepers. You can't see me doing air quotes, but I'm doing air quotes around that, as though they are an invading army. So like Poland is still one of those vehemently anti-Russian countries, and I think eventually all of these states will kind of. I think at the minute we're all still caught up in a wave of hysteria where it's like, we're going to be bravely supporting the American freedom and democracy movements, and we're going to support Ukraine. But the second that the impacts of all of these like gas and oil bans, or like not being able to buy gas and oil, the refusal to pay rubles, all this kind of shit, as soon as that actually starts biting and the people start protesting, which they will, because people don't want to be cold, and it's not even just people though, it's the factories. Like entire industrial economies will grind to a halt as a direct result of these actions by the Eastern European states. And the second that starts to happen, there will be mass protests in the Eastern European states, and either the governments will be overthrown or they'll have to resort to extreme fascist violence against the protesters, workers, and stuff that do rise up.
Germany has taken a massive hit, especially in its manufacturing sector, because Germany was one of those countries, or was probably the only country in Europe. Well, not the only country in Europe, but the number one country in Europe in terms of kind of standard of living, and also cheap lifestyle compared to living expenses of, for example, Britain. Mm-hmm. And they're going to start losing all that. So also I think the US at the same time, they want to hit Germany because they don't want to see obviously a rising EU.
Well, Germany as well. Don't forget, not even that, but Germany can't be trusted, can it, in terms of from the US's point of view, because it's been socialist before, so it can always go socialist again, right? There's always that potential, isn't there? Yeah. So they've got to keep that stamped out, and not only that, but Germany under Merkel sort of started drifting into that Russian sphere, didn't they? Because Russia was offering them a better deal.
I was going to say, geopolitically, it makes a lot more sense for Germany to be in the to have good relations with Russia and even China and Iran as well. It just makes geopolitical sense to them. However,
well, of course.
Yeah.
Carry on.
But obviously the US doesn't want that, so that's why they want to give Germany a bit of a hit.
Well, any country, not just Germany, any country. Go on, Tom.
There's a kind of a famous slogan. I can't remember who coined it, but they said that the purpose of NATO is to keep Russia out and keep Germany down, and that was always the purpose. I mean, Germany is one of the only Western economies, Germany and France really, the only two Western economies left that didn't really deindustrialize, right? So when Thatcherism and Reaganism came to the UK and the USA, all of the industrial capacity of both of those countries, which were both fairly industrialized countries, the USA, one of the most industrialized countries in the world before that point, kind of shipped all their manufacturing to the East, mostly to China, to other countries, to India, to, whichever state, doesn't really matter. And they've kind of relied on having, with the west of Europe, they've kind of relied on maintaining these industrial economies in order to keep an actual flow of real tangible GDP, things that are actually being produced, because nothing's fucking produced in the UK anymore. It's all, services. That's what
specialist sort of items, yeah.
Yeah, extremely specialist. Yeah, extremely specialist items, and then services. Something like 78% of the UK economy is service based. Now, you can't build houses out of services. You can't, You can't feed your family with services. Services are bullshit, and they only really exist under the kind of the neoliberal framework that allows them to exist as the chief economy. The fact that the UK is basically the West's bank, essentially. is what kind of keeps the UK as a relevant player in the world, that and their nuclear weapons. Whereas like Germany actually has always had this tangible economy, but when you have an industrialized country, you inevitably have disgruntled proletariat, because that's just how it works. I think that's part of the reason why the West has been trying to do this deindustrialization drive. Like they play it off as, you know, we're going green, we're going to be carbon neutral by X year or whatever, but they don't give a shit about that in reality. In reality, it's all about kind of transitioning the actual proletariat into kind of all these service jobs that don't really have any future, and you can kind of just shift the workers around and bust unions and stuff. It's a lot easier. But in Germany, you've always had this kind of militant left-wing spirit in the German people, which is obviously why the German Democratic Republic was so successful before it was unceremoniously annexed by the west of Germany. But like that's the thing, as Fran said, like the Germans can't be trusted. Like they not just because of their past, but because of the way their economy functions. Or
well.
Yeah, and not only that though, like Germany is the key, isn't it, of like Marx's works. Like Lenin's plan wasn't for revolution to stay in the USSR, was it, and Russia? It was supposed to be the spark that ignited revolution in Germany, right? Germany is the key to the socialist plan of the 20th century, right? So,
one interesting...
Go on.
Sorry. I was going to say one interesting facet of the new German government that came in after kind of Merkel stepped down is that, like, I believe something like 30% of the coalition, maybe a bit more, is made up of the Green Party, right? And the Green Party have all these kind of, supposedly green, quote-unquote, eco-socialist views. That's their supposed, like, much like the Green Party in the UK calls itself. But in reality, they are some of the most brutal tools of American imperialism. I genuinely believe that these Green parties throughout the West that have been gaining more and more traction are just heavily funded by the USA. You look at Annalena, well, they're all warhawks, yeah. But you look at Annalena Baerbock, she's from the Green Party, and she's one of the most vehement pro-Ukraine, anti-Russian figures in the parliament. She was actively working with the Americans to sabotage the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which, like all of the other constituent members of the German political class, the Social Democratic Party...
She's been getting heckled as well by actual Germans this week, right? Did you see that?
She's been getting heckled everywhere. She can't make the public appearance. She's a fucking
she
clown.
She made one and got heckled as a warhawk, like...
She is a warhawk.
Yeah.
Vito's here. Welcome to the show, Vito.
Hi. Thank you. Hi.
Nice for you to join.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I think that was me who posted that video where people were dissatisfied and we're generally dissatisfied with her pro-NATO stance and calling her a liar and a warmonger. So I think Fran did sort of like noted that there is a strong socialist spirit that Germany, despite the new government, still might have some of the
and it's nothing special. It's nothing special of Germans. It's just like because of what Tom just said. Their economy is that like important, and like, once socialists take it over, had West Germany not existed, right? Like you'd possibly be looking at like the entire world being socialist by now, right? Because you've had nearly 100 years of you'd have had over 100 years wouldn't you, of socialism? Just this year, in fact, the civil war was ended in Russia. Go on, Tom.
Thing is as well, like the many people in the east of Germany which still kind of remember fondly the GDR and absolutely detest the fact that their entire state apparatus was kind of just torn down undemocratically and annexed away, and many of the kind of the social provisions that we know
I mean, call it what it is, right? It's an act of colonialism.
Yeah, it was. Well, yeah,
recolonized.
Yeah, but what I'm getting at is like all of the what Sammy was saying earlier when he said that the German people have a higher kind of standard of living than most other Westerners, which is true. Like in terms of their social securities, their pension provisions, all these kind of things, they are the highest in Europe, or some of the highest in Europe, and all of that is basically a relic of the Soviet past, not Soviet, the GDR past. Like all of those provisions were taken from the GDR, and it is basically because of the fact that the East Germans who were annexed back into the West German regime refused to give up those kind of privileges that Germany still enjoys them today. But if the USA is successful in its current plan, which I mean, it's been successful in the destruction of Nord Stream 2. It's been successful in forcing Germany to kind of take extremely hardline measures against Russian gas and oil. So it does look likely that, in concert with the German Greens, who are a very imperialist party, as we just said, the Western powers, France, who has their own dreams of a European empire, the UK as the USA's puppet, and the USA directly, will realize their goal of seeing a deindustrialized, defanged Germany. And once you've got rid of that, the Germany's
Well, it's
nothing
almost happened
really.
straight away, hasn't it? Like, who are Germany anymore since Merkel's gone? Like, you could hate Merkel as much as you want, but Germany had its place, didn't it, in the world, and it's like disappeared. It's just disappeared now since she went. But like, it's quite what you were saying then. It's quite funny how quick this Ukraine conflict like realigned the West to its like before position, right? The UK basically had spent years trying to isolate itself with Brexit and such, right? And doing deals with China and Russia behind the US's back and all kinds of like, you know, just looking after itself as the UK like normally does, because that's what Brits do, right? Brits don't do anything. They're not doing it for your sake, really, are they? Doing it for the selfish reasons, really. They're only being a US puppet now because if not, the US will like destroy the British government and put Keir Starmer in, right? Who will just say yes to everything. So that's the reason why Boris Johnson goes and stands in Kiev, whereas Biden's like, nope. Do you know what I mean? You think I'm dumb? I think
the thing with like British kind of Russophobia, it goes back so much further, because obviously there was the great game between the Russian Empire and the British Empire, where they were kind of mortal enemies, fighting over territory. They've always had a hatred of each other, Britain and Russia, and that's why Britain was always kind of like the attack dog against the Soviets in Europe when the Soviet Union was a thing. Yeah. And ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russophobia has never gone away.
You know, big player in the White Army and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly.
But that Russophobia has never gone away. It's nothing to do with anti-communism. It's nothing. It's purely just a vitriolic hatred of Russians, I think, and that is like deeply set in the minds of kind of like the British political class. Like everyone in the British political elite, perhaps with the exception of people like Corbyn, but I think even Corbyn was probably very fucking anti-Russia. And I think that's pretty much like the one thing that unites all of the UK political elite, regardless of which side of the fence they find themselves on, is like a mutual hatred of the eastern states. And they have to, because in order to maintain their position as one of the top countries in the world, you know, one of the top UN Security Council permanent member seat holders, a country that punches far above its weight geopolitically, which it does, because obviously Britain's very small, our economy's very small, the army's very small, but we still have a very prominent place on the world stage due to kind of like propaganda, successful dissemination of the English language, all these kind of things. And as a result, you've got to hate these rising powers of China and Russia, because
it's keeping it in the family, isn't it? And you know, that age-old thing that Europeans have done, and European merchants have just inherited that from feudalism before, and that's why, you know, you'll see there was the 8 Nation Alliance, right? for however many 100 years. But even inside that, they would, like you're talking about there, they would have wars between each other. So like that stage was set, wasn't it, for UK and Russia well before Bolshevik Revolution. I wouldn't say it's not that they're anti-communist. That just made it worse, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying they're not anti-communist. Of course they are. They're, they're all bourgeois, fucking electoralists. Of course they're anti-communist. But the communism kind of thing, there was never so much of a red scare in the UK as there was in the USA, right? Now, realistically, there should have been if we were so scared of communism, because we're much closer to the communist heartland. I mean, don't get me wrong. Yes, there was anti-communism. There was anti-communist purges and the sort, but nothing like the scale we saw with McCarthyism in the USA. So like, it's never been about communism. It's always been about the great game of geopolitics and making sure that Britain remains at its high point. And like, I think that's why you've got this kind of like ethos with the British political elite now, like particularly the likes of Johnson and the people within Johnson's cabinet particularly, where they're all like imperialist nostalgia masturbators. Like that's their ideology. Like they haven't got an actual coherent ideology other than remember how great we were back in the 1800s. Remember how great Britain was. Britain was great. We can make Britain
an admiral. Blah blah blah.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the whole thing, and it's a deeply sick kind of problem that persists throughout all the British electoral class: Labour, Conservative, fucking Lib Dems, Green, all of them.
That's Marx, isn't it, with dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, right? Because they're going to pick on that class anyway. Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is the speed in which this, like, can you remember the world before the Ukraine conflict? No, because it's changed again, hasn't it? All those Western countries have like realigned themselves. The US has managed to like throw its net around Europe and cast all Western Europe and capture it again and trick it into doing a load of stupid sanctions that, you know, are against their own good. And it's also managed to ramp up all that like right-wing ideology, anti-communist, in the former socialist states that it's been messing around in as well, hasn't it? So it's like turned everything up to 11 whilst not actually giving a shit about anybody in Ukraine, really. Just piling lethal weapons into the place, right? Like, that's not solving the situation, is it? To pour more weapons in. You know, that was always their argument against that was why they were in the Middle East. Oh, we've just got to stop the flow of weapons, right? Once we stop the flow of weapons, peace can be achieved, right? We've got to stop the flow of weapons to these groups we're fighting. But now they're just playing, they are the flow of weapons, right? So it's just amazing how the world has realigned itself to like almost like World War II, you know, back to those levels as a defense strategy against like countries that aren't really ever fucking threatening them. Like China still to this day is like, oh, we would love to have a mutual relationship with the US. We've got no problem with it, right? Because that just mutually benefits humanity. Because, well, not only that, it means that there's no war, right? Because diplomacy is the first, you know, way for two countries to have peace. Once diplomacy happens, then war is a lot less likely. But it seems like the US has just decided for no reason whatsoever. Like, they're just on a trajectory that nobody seems to be able to stop.
Speaking of diplomacy as well, it seemed yesterday the Russian delegation to the negotiations said that basically the Ukraine negotiations with the Ukrainians have absolutely stalled and failed to achieve their objectives and maybe calming situations. And obviously their demands are justified, like having a neutral Ukraine, not joining NATO, denazification.
What's really interesting about the way Russia's handled this war, and this is a perspective of kind of I kind of came to understand as a result of the Duran, like they were talking about it, and it's a really interesting perspective because the second this conflict started, the most recent conflict, I mean, not the initial civil war in Ukraine, But the moment the special military operation begun, Russia began immediately negotiating with Kiev, right? Like, did Washington start to negotiate with Kabul when they invaded Afghanistan? No, because they had the goal of complete, destruction of the government, complete overthrow of the state, and turning it into a compliant puppet. Same with Iraq. There was no attempt at diplomacy with Saddam Hussein. Now, Russia, as soon as they went in, they were like, look, these are our objectives. We will obtain these objectives. Now, you can do it peacefully, or we will achieve them by force. And Ukraine should have realized that they could have maintained their little horrible Nazi puppet state in the West just by acknowledging reality, basically. Acknowledging reality.
Not even Ukraine, though, right? Like, literally, Hunter Biden could have sponged the Ukrainian state for as much as one. They've literally just been looting the place. Why did they exasperate the situation?
Because it combats Russia, doesn't it? That's literally it. They're using the Ukraine as a proxy war to fight against Russia. They're using all their Western weapons against Russia, but they're just in the hands of Ukro-Nazis as opposed to fucking anyone else. Like, it'd be like the exact same situation here would be the USA goes into Afghanistan, right, and starts doing all their horrible terrorist shit in Afghanistan that they're doing to the people there, and Russia openly says, okay, we're sending fighter jets, we're sending tanks, we're sending APCs to the Afghan army, and also we're going to train Afghan army personnel in Chechnya. That's the exact situation mirrored, right?
Yeah.
But now that would not be acceptable. The world would say, Russia, what the fuck are you doing? This is not acceptable. But when it's Ukraine, when it's this Nazi state that the West has made into some kind of democratic defender of freedom and based Reddit points and all that shit, like it's somehow justifiable. Like the other day, I made a post on our Telegram. There's the recent shipment of M777 artillery cannons from the USA to Ukraine. They were initially sent to Germany, and American Army soldiers from the Florida National Guard, in combination with the Canadian Army, Royal Canadian Army, basically were at an ex-Nazi Wehrmacht base, a base that the Wehrmacht built in World War II, that the USA kind of took over as their own military base. It's called Genva or something like that. Go back on our Telegram, you'll be able to see it. Literally a Nazi base, right? And they're training what they referred to as Ukrainian National Guard. Now, what we know as Ukrainian National Guard is neo-Nazi militias, because they're the only National Guard left in Ukraine. So the USA and Canada are openly, proud of themselves, telling the media that they're training neo-Nazis at an ex-Nazi base to use fucking American artillery to kill Russians. It's amazing how restrained Russia has been in this conflict, because, in my opinion on the laws of war, that kind of immediately makes the USA and Canada parties to the conflict, and it would be perfectly within legal justification for Russia to strike at those German bases that are training Ukrainian neo-Nazis, but they don't, obviously, because we all know that would lead to escalation, potentially World War III. So it's a good thing that they don't kind of take my advice. But that it shows how restrained Russia is being in this conflict, in the face of such blatant aggression from the West, particularly the USA. And if Russia didn't have the vast nuclear stockpiles that it does have, I'd be very scared for how this war would be going right now. I think we'd be seeing a full ground invasion.
Yeah. We have Skulking Skunk said, it's a bit of a tongue twister there. He said a while ago, hey, also thank you, Mango, for covering stuff in Palestine and not just Ukraine. Both are equally important. Well, thanks for the feedback. We're always excited to have some feedback from our viewers. but moving things a little bit more southwards to West Asia, North Africa, the Arab region, so to speak. In the past few days, I think it was yesterday, we've had an interesting visit. There was a special delegation to Moscow from a Palestinian resistance group that cannot be named because, probably be banned off YouTube or something if we said the name.
Right.
They had a bit of an interesting visit to Moscow, which had to be weirdly cut short a bit due to some, circumstances. I haven't got my thumb on exactly what that is yet, but they said they will visit again within the next few weeks. I think late this month or early next month. Also, not only that, but in the last weeks, since the operation in Ukraine started, Russia has went, especially concerning the Zionist strikes on Syria. Russia has went from this position of sort of passive neutrality kind of thing to being actively condemning the Zionist airstrikes on Syria, so to speak. So I think that when things are hitting the fan, so to speak,
well, it's going to, isn't it?
They're being made to take more staunch positions.
Yeah, but that's like a given, isn't it? Because it's only the opposite of what I was just saying then about the West doing it. So, like the way that the speed that the West realigned itself, that it's only the same as that, isn't it? But like in the reverse, it's just the opposite side. So, of course, in times of peace, countries are going to by default of not wanting to be seen as the antagonizer, right? Because that's the main thing, isn't it, with a lot of geopolitics these days? Because the USA will love for a country to do something aggressive, right? Because the moment it can do something aggressive, they can get on the UN, right? And they can make the UN sanction whatever. They can get all the countries around the world to sanction, blah blah blah. They can even go to war with a place if the supposed crime is so bad, right? Yeah. In the case of like Iraq or whatever. So that's why in quote unquote peace times, or where geopolitics is a lot more peaceful, where it's still like, they're able to discuss things face to face rather than have fights over it, you're going to see things be a bit more neutral. But as soon as things get antagonistic, it's going to happen, isn't it? I mean, we've spoke about that contradiction before, haven't we?
Definitely.
A lot, months ago, it was, because Israel has always torn. It's almost like by Israel attacking Syria, because Russia, it's a geopolitical fact that Russia has a good relationship with Israel, right? Because of modern history, right? Because of the deal at the foundation, arguably Stalin maybe had a bit too much hope for what would happen there, blah blah blah. So Russia's historically had a good relationship. Now the first sort of kink in that is Israel deciding, whilst knowing that Russia is helping Syria defend itself from Western imperialism, starts to antagonise and put Russia in a position, because by attacking a Syrian jet, it's putting Russia in a position, isn't it? Because now Russia,
I think that
the Syrians are going to turn around to Russia at some point and be like, well, why aren't you defending our jets? You've come to help us, but you won't.
Well, actually, the Syrians have made a statement about that, and they have previously said that Russia's here to help us in counter-terrorism, pretty much.
Of course, but that's what I'm saying, because because their relationship is so strong that it's not been able to be broken by that. But what if it did, right? But now that we're in a situation where Russia is already getting thrown sanctions at, and threats and all sorts, well, they can afford to take Syria's side a lot more openly, right? So then now, so it's just. That's just how it's going to go, right? The way US keeps accusing China of helping them make propaganda. Well, at some point, China's going to get more and more, quote unquote, aggressive in their retort, because you push, eventually countries push back. We're just in that stage of human of human race, of the human history, aren't we, at the minute?
I think we're already seeing that kind of the realignment with. I mean, China obviously still maintains their neutrality in all of these conflicts and stuff, but we're absolutely seeing the rhetoric change every day. From it started off with like, yeah, we support the Russian moves and we oppose NATO expansionism, and now the Chinese stance is like, America is the architect of this conflict, and all the deaths in this conflict are the result of the USA. That's a significant like change in rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
But like, not just China. I think the most important geopolitical loss that America's had during this schism is India, because like India was a fairly stalwart kind of Western client state up until
as well as having a good relationship with Russia as well, right? That's a key part in this as well, because even though they had a good relationship with the West, they could still be allowed, quote unquote, I'm going to say allowed, quote unquote, because the US allowed them to do it without interfering in politics, right? Because Russia was not a threat. But do carry on.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, essentially, Russia has always kind of been like, we know that you Indians have good relations with the West, you have good relations with us, that's fine, mutual cooperation and stuff. And Russia has never made demands of India. That's an important thing. But the second this conflict started, the USA started threatening to fucking sanction India, one of its supposedly most important Quad allies against China. If they didn't fall in lockstep with the US sanctions on Russian oil, like, why would India, a friendly nation to Russia and one that has a lot of history of friendly relations with Russia, why would they kneecap their own economy and like potentially cause huge downturn in their own country to satisfy Americans? Like, I think the Americans thought India was much more capitulated than they actually were, and we're seeing this kind of reinvigorated kind of independent spirit coming from India. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they're going to immediately mend relations with China and become part of this great alliance or anything like that, but they're definitely moving in the right direction, which is away from the US camp.
Right?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is they're moving away from the US camp quite vehemently. And like, what has America gained? America's gained like the support of the most reactionary fascist states in Europe, like Lithuania, Romania,
which have also shot themselves in the foot already, like last year, with all this messing about over, boycott Beijing Winter Olympics, as if that was like going to change world events, right? What happened with that? He wasted all that money and political waste of time and the waste of like Lithuanians' actual political process that Lithuanians lost, right? Because the US was fucking about trying to get people to boycott an Olympics that the world's already forgot about, right? That didn't change anything in terms of like the actual geopolitics of the, this thing in Ukraine has almost taught them a big lesson at the same time, hasn't it?
I'd like to. I think you're giving them too much credit there, because they keep. It's like that definition of insanity, isn't it? The definition of insanity being doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, and like that is literally what the USA has been doing basically since the collapse of the USSR. Like, they haven't learned any of their actual lessons that they've been given, the free lessons. Like, China should have been the biggest learning curve for them when they thought China had capitulated. They thought China had fallen to the Western camp, thought it had fallen to capitalism and, all this shit. And then China came out and said... Sorry, Vito, go on.
Yeah. No worries. Just wanted to add on is that I think there's this delusion that the West is like the best of the West is best when it comes to like their you might have seen that the whole world is against Russia, or the whole world is against the authoritarian China, but the matter of fact is that
it's the opposite.
The West is like the West, the population of the West isn't going to it's just less than 20%, to be perfectly honest. And you still got people who are in the sphere of the quote unquote democratic, the democratic civilization, or whatever they call it. There's still people like the rest of the world just wanted to have their own, have their own economy and have their own foreign policy. They might not want to join to get to allow themselves to embed it with the Western quote-unquote democratic civilization, because it's they have to develop their own economy, and the way to do that isn't to kind of fix it like what the West always talked about. What the West has been trying to do, trying to co-opt the struggles of the co-opt the struggles of the people in Africa, in Latin America, sort of things like that. You've seen groups like the National Endowment for Democracy trying to have like many different grants to entice the population of that particular country to rise against leaders that they don't like. So that Washington personally don't like. So I think that there's this thought that whatever the West has talked about when it comes to like the international rule-based order, it's the reality is quite different to how things planned out. So
I mean, hold on, Tom. A good example of that is this week, Blinken tweeted out, "I spoke with Guaido to reiterate US support for the Venezuelan people as they seek to restore freedom, democracy and prosperity to their country. We remain committed to the success of Venezuelan-led negotiations as the best path for a peaceful return to democracy." So that's Blinken's tweet. He's going on about how Guaido is still, in the Americans' view, the president of Venezuela. But like in reality, like Venezuela, Maduro is having meetings with Iran, right? And they're discussing like cooperation on energy and
defense.
Defense and food security, all sorts, right? And not at the same time as that, you might wonder why somebody replied. One of our listeners replied, and he was just like, "Well, this is why they do it, right?" And the reason why for that is because the US is using this idea that Venezuela has this government that America can recognize as a government that they can put through as the representation as Venezuela in some American court cases to do with some like American corporations inside Venezuela. So basically what's happening is these cases are going on in the US at the minute, and the people who are meant to show up are Guaido's guys, right? But they're just not showing up. So they're not showing up on purpose because, then the case goes out the way the US government wants it to, right? And the Venezuelans don't actually get to represent themselves in this court case. So I mean, it's a good example, isn't it? Because people might wonder why is Guaido still being used like 4 years later, when he's clearly, there's been how many elections? I think 2 elections in Venezuela since. So to claim that he's the president is completely void, isn't it? Because they've already had more elections. Go on, Tom.
what's really funny about that is like right when the start of the Ukraine crisis begun, like they were talking about how they were meeting with Maduro and trying to buy oil from him. So like, you know, he was the US administration was talking about meeting with Maduro to buy oil from him and talking about how he was a more democratic leader now than before and all this. So obviously like he's fucked them off from these oil deals, and now he's no longer the president again. He was briefly the president again for 20 minutes. Yeah. For like a week, he was the president of Venezuela again, and then it switched back to being Guaido when they realized he wasn't gonna, you know, comply with the US's imperial requests. And like that's just really funny to me. It's like the USA lives in this like the people in charge of the USA live in this like parallel dimension where like everything they believe is just factually untrue. Like it's absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, but that's why though. It's not that like the US is just trying to. It's not that the US is trying to fool me, you, all our listeners, the rest of the world, etc. That Guaido is the legitimate president, right? That there's like a reason behind it. That's what I'm getting at. Like it's not just like, oh well, the US is doing it for the sake because Guaido might be a little bit more pro-US than Maduro is, right? Like they're actually using them for a reason in the meantime. So it's not just, oh, the US keeps claiming it like the memes suggest. You know, here's
I know. I'm not saying...
Let me just read this out. Like, you know, a case involved 3 Cayman Island-based subsidiaries. You know, a hedge fund. The corporations want to collect on a defaulted Venezuelan bonds, right? So they'll take the Guaido government to court over it. The Guaido government will not show up, and the case will fall in favor of the US corporation, basically, because the US knows that if Maduro turns up, right, that it's going to be the complete opposite, isn't it? So the best outcome for the US until all this sort of basic looting that they're doing is legally like dotted off, because that's what they got to do. They will keep recognizing Guaido as the president, and as soon as all that cases are done, they'll drop him, just like Josh Wong sat in jail, right? Just like every other puppet, all those, you know, fascists that are getting domed in Ukraine, they just get dropped. Go on, what were you gonna say?
I'm going to say like it's. I'm sure, obviously, there is always there's always a tangible reason behind why they're doing these things, but it's insane that they sit there and parrot these narratives to the rest of the world as though the rest of the world is stupid. Like there's no Nazis in Ukraine, and then we see literal constant video footage of like SS flags and fucking Nazi regalia and, you know, all this shit.
The BBC is saying now that Azov has no Nazis, but then like the BBC themselves have published multiple articles though, like between 2014 until February 2022.
Not just that,
posted multiple articles about the Ukraine's fucking Nazi problem.
Not just that, but on the article where they claim that they don't have a Nazi problem, for the photo for that article, they would have an Azov soldier wearing Nazi insignia.
Yeah, but they just argue that away, don't they? It's a classic. Yeah. That's always been. If it's not like the swastika, they're not a Nazi, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It's probably something.
It's fine. Yeah.
It's just inspired by.
They're probably going to something like this. It's like, why are you taking it? Like, I think rallies would be like, why are you taking his agency to be of becoming a Nazi? Why are you so authoritarian? Why are you so pro Putin? Why do you let this guy be a Nazi for once?
Yeah, it's fucking funny. Like I saw multiple statuses.
Hold on, Tom. Let Vio finish.
This is really. I think this is early, during the beginning of the invasion. There was like call in Canada to ban the word poutine because it's like it's sort of like a national food in Canada, where it's like just fries with cheese and gravy and stuff like that. So that was particularly funny. You know, since you're gonna ban the word poutine because it's
There was like there was tweets going
Yeah.
around that were saying like the progression of the Nazi problem in Ukraine started off with there are no Nazis in Ukraine, and then it became okay, so there's some Nazis but not very many, and then it became okay, so there's Nazis in every high-ranking military division
Around the world.
and in all of the security services and in the Ukrainian government, but it's okay because they're resisting Putin. And then it's like and we're not at this stage yet, but the next stage is like actually Nazis are good, and like that is pretty much like we've seen that progression happen, unfold in front of our eyes, and like it's absolutely depressing for somebody who's like grandparents fought in World War II against the Nazis, like to see Nazis being rehabilitated against the people who Nazis genocided.
Yeah.
It's
and like the Soviet Union took most of the brunt, and also China, like 70 to 80%.
They had the they paid the two highest sacrifices in World War II, didn't they? The Soviet Union and China.
Yeah.
Then. But
like the fact that the West, the US and the UK, they were like the only appear on the like pretty late, to be perfectly frank. It's like 40, like only before that it was just they're mostly taking a hands-off approach to the war. They were like saying, we're pretty neutral. We're not going to deal with how Nazi Germany is trying to take over several like places like Czech, like Poland and stuff like that.
And only this week as well, there was like Nazi slogans spray painted over like a Western World War II memorial in Holland, right? Did you see that? They were spray painted like Azov logos and swastikas and like Ukraine coloured flags on the graves of like Western Allied troops.
No,
it's weird,
they're
isn't
having a bit of nervous laughter about that.
It's weird. I just hold on. I just going back to what Tom was saying about China. This is their statement. I found it. We posted it the other day. The expansion of NATO to the east not only did not make Europe safer, but it also sowed the seeds of conflict. Right? NATO starts conflicts against sovereign states, which entails colossal human losses and humanitarian disasters. Like, I mean, you can say that China's like up in the rhetoric, right, and getting more aggressive. That's not an aggressive statement, though, is it? You're just like just laying out the truth. You're not doing what I was talking about earlier on in the show, like in peacetime, where you give countries like a bit of benefit of doubt just because who are you to judge? And do you know what I mean? Diplomacy's best done if you don't.
It's a factual statement.
Now the question comes. Now that we mentioned like a few months ago in that pinned post, like what our expectations were of how these things were going to fall out, we know that they're going to provoke something through Taiwan and possibly even cut off the energy supplies coming from the Middle East because they rely heavily, like China relies heavily on oil imports from the Middle East. We know that this is coming, that they're going to provoke something with the separatist regime in the province of Taiwan. And probably, as I said again, cut off the energy in some form. Hopefully, it won't get to that degree. But when do you think it's gonna happen? Like, I think it'll be about maybe this year, if not next year. Like,
who knows though? Because events like the conflict in Ukraine just like shift the flow so much that like you can't tell, can you? Like until this conflict in Ukraine is like settled, pretty much anything's on the table, isn't it? No, like the media, even and not even just the media, but politicians on both sides are mentioning like nukes to each other. And I know it's like defensive talk, but still, the very like thing about mentioning them is scary enough.
Yeah, but even like the Americans were saying that we are studying how to apply what we're doing to Russia. how to do it to China. Like we are studying.
Well,
the
America said
application
the
to
other
China.
day, didn't they, that even during this conflict, China is still our number one enemy. Right?
Yeah.
And they use the word enemy. Like, where has China made the US its enemy ever? And the fact that it's socialist and America's capitalist is that's the only thing, isn't it?
It's probably back when
No.
Pompeo said, "Oh, China's a Marxist-Leninist state." Like, really?
No,
that's not exactly news, is it? But
the time when China became
Go on, Tom.
the time when China became the enemy was when the USA finally realized that Deng Xiaoping had played them masterfully in a game of 7D chess. Like when they'd exported all of their industry to China,
And
like with the
technology.
promise that China would become capitalist and, you know, follow in their footsteps and all that. And then when Xi Jinping just came in and said, "Nah, that's not happening," that was kind of like the biggest fuck you to the USA, which is a good thing. And as a result, we immediately had the Pivot East campaign. And since the Pivot East campaign under Obama, the USA has been like trying to hamper China at every single step.
I think the real start towards like the decoupling from China was the start of like the COVID crisis, like all the economic changes that
Before
happened.
that-
I think
before
that was like
that.
a stepping stone for that. Yeah, there's definitely some things before that, like the trade war, but I think the first very significant kind of like stepping stone they took was with the Corona crisis and like the attempting of economic and cultural isolation. But Tom,
The
you-
propaganda
Tom-
like turned up, didn't it, at the
A
start?
lot,
Like
yeah.
almost they used COVID as like the gloves are off now, right?
Yeah, indeed.
Against
but Tom,
China.
But Tom, you know a lot about like the energy supply aspect kind of things through the Malacca Strait, for example, and like Belt and Road Initiative projects. Like just giving us an idea about like what a provocation with Taiwan might, like if the US were to provoke something.
What it
with
entails.
Taiwan, what would like that entail? And I think that cutting off energy supply, this energy supply line from the Middle East, would be on the table. So what do you think that would entail?
It's absolutely on the table. That's one of America's only weapons against China, really. I think with this recent coup d'etat we've seen in Pakistan overthrowing Imran Khan is potentially the first signals of something like this happening, because the main purpose of the Belt and Road Initiative initially, before it became a globe-spanning infrastructure project, was to build a pipeline from Kashgar in Xinjiang province all the way through Baluchistan in Pakistan and down to the Gwadar port area, which basically, if you look at a map, basically means that China can receive energy imports from Pakistan. Pakistan receives them from the Indian Ocean, and there's no significant choke points between Pakistan and the Middle Eastern kind of oil export routes. So that was the method of securing China's energy independence from the Malacca Strait, because previously all energy shipments had to come via the Malacca Strait. Most of China's imports come via the Malacca Strait, something like 70%, because it's very difficult to ship across the Pacific, and obviously that's the only thing on that side of the Pacific is the USA. So anything that's not coming from the USA is basically coming via the Malacca Strait. So it's always been known, the Malacca Strait's always been known as China's jugular when the Americans are talking about it, because they think that in a potential crisis situation, all they need to do is basically close the strait to Chinese shipping, which, don't get me wrong, that would cause an absolute global economic recession of the like we've never seen before, because China wouldn't also be able to export its materials. But the USA is obviously very single-minded, doesn't really think about the repercussions of its actions until it's too late.
What do you think about the fact that like China and because for the last 8 years, like Ukraine, although it's been infected with the US, it's still had a decent economic relationship with China, right? It's
really good relationship with China.
So what's going to happen post conflict with that though? Like
Depends on the state of.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? It depends what happens with the state.
Because like if the Ukrainian state ceases to exist, then nothing.
I mean,
But
surely
at
in the
the
south,
moment,
just Belt and Road projects will probably just continue, right? But I mean, if the country's to split in two, is that going to cut Belt and Road projects?
right now,
it is, right?
The Ukrainian state is still asking for China to be one of the countries that guarantees its security in a potential ceasefire situation with Russia. So they're basically saying that they would require China to guarantee security against Russia in the event of a surrender to Russia. That's still their stance. That they still look to China as the sensible power, especially kind of since they've realized that NATO isn't coming to help them in any meaningful way other than arms exports, basically.
Even the US
So
keeps doing that, don't they? The US keeps like trying to make out China's the key in this conflict. Or as long until China takes a side, it's going to continue. What's that about?
And I mean, like the back to Sammy's question, like right now, well, before the construction of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and the Gwadar Port gas pipeline construction, oil pipeline construction, 78% of China's oil came via the Malacca Strait. Now, that was kind of 2017, 2018, that figure was still accurate. Now, the Pakistan pipeline is active, despite suffering terrorist attacks from separatists within Pakistan itself, potentially at the direction of the USA, because we know the USA does use terrorists to fund to kind of further its geopolitical goals. But sorry, I've just had a complete mind blank. What was I saying? But one other interesting fact that kind of could help in this situation, if a complete kind of stoppage to the Malacca Strait were to go ahead, would be the fact that as a result of all of these Russian embargoes in the West, Russia has already started building multiple new gas and oil pipelines to China, the Power of Siberia and Power of Siberia 2 pipelines. Power of Siberia 1 is already in operation. Power of Siberia 2 is being built. And, if no one wants Russian oil and China can't get Russian oil, the West can't get Russian oil, then, China will take all that Russian oil. And then you've got that situation there. Well, of course. So the USA is kind of shooting itself in the foot by getting rid of the capacity for Russian imports and forcing Russia to export most of its oil and gas to China. Because in this situation, it's taken away one of America's only trump cards, as it were, against China. Now, don't get me wrong, if they close the Malacca Strait, that will lead to a global economic crisis, the likes we've never seen before. China will suffer. Its economy will suffer. But China is Vito probably knows more about this kind of aspect than me, but China is a very resilient country and will adjust. It will, divert its industries to being only the most productive industries if oil and gas supplies run low.
I mean, just as an example for that, being under sanction. I mean, just look at Iran. For the past more than 40 years, they've been subjected to one of the heaviest they're in queue with the TPRK and Cuba for being the most heavily sanctioned country on earth. And despite that, they have shown themselves to be quite resilient. They've become very developed economically, technologically, culturally. To the degree that even a few years ago, I think it was back in the Obama administration days, or late Obama, early Trump, I think, something like that, when the Iranians downed the most advanced American UAV, they reverse engineered it. They didn't shoot it down. They made it land. Yeah, they reverse engineered it and made it land.
Yeah, America begged for it back
in one piece. Yeah, and not only did America beg for it back, but immediately you had delegations from Russia and China go to Iran. Obviously, it wasn't very public, and just ask the Iranians basically, how do you do this?
Yeah. And it's a shared interest, though, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I know this from one analyst who was very close to the Iranian leadership.
Obama really begged for it back. The Americans were like livid.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was in one piece, so they had all the technology in front of them.
And what it had recorded.
Exactly.
Because they just hacked it and made it land.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, like, Iran is now one of the most advanced countries in the world, and they are the fifth largest. They are the fifth country in the world in terms of, I think, technological output or like scientific papers in like computer science. But anyway, like when it comes to technology, they're really up there. So, in the face of all the sanctions,
which again is a product of like being shut out because
exactly.
You know,
and now that they've signed this $400 billion cooperation agreement with China, they're going to cooperate in all spheres: economic, cultural, defense, petrochemical. That's just going to solidify like the main triple alliance of like the new multipolar world. And I think Iran is actually the key in this because Iran is on the front line, isn't it? In this whole conflict. We have seen
as much as Russia is now, they have been for like a long time.
I think
either directly or involving themselves.
Exactly, and I think Iran will be the key in this conflict, and it'll almost save the other two countries, because we've seen, like, after Russia got hit with all these sanctions, they have turned to Iran and helping them with manufacturing and oil and gas. Well, not oil and gas, sorry, but at least in like car manufacturing and textiles, they are now looking to like Iranian suppliers, and that's just like touching the tip of the iceberg there.
The thing with
hold on, Tom. Let me just read what the China defense minister met the chief staff of the armed forces of Iran
and the president of Iran.
In this meeting, latest international and regional developments and the expansion of strategic defense and security relations, ways to improve the level of interaction between the armed forces of the two countries we discussed. Well, you know what that means, right?
Yeah.
Military cooperation. Major General Mohammad Bagheri, Chief Staff of the Armed Forces, told reporters relations between the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the People's Republic of China have been developing in recent years, and we have held joint naval exercises in the Oman Sea. He added, in today's meeting with the Chinese Ministry of Defense, it was agreed to develop bilateral cooperation in the field of holding exercises, exchange of experiences, training and other common fields between the armed forces of the two countries so that we can provide better security for the regions under our control.
I think that also means like the Iranians are sending over military technology to China. I think that's what it involves, because we've seen some, well, not we, but other monitors, people who monitor the flight radars, they noticed some interesting flights going, Iranian airlines, non-civilian, making interesting landings in Moscow and in India. It's not a civilian transport plane, so other things are on the table. So we could be seeing that they're even transporting like military technology to, and that's how that kind of shows how like up there they are, so to speak. Not just that, but even in the cultural sphere as well.
But don't forget they're supplying like the Palestinian resistance, etc.
Absolutely, yeah. Like they are
Iraqi popular movement, and
yeah,
Syria,
they are the
helping
main
in Syria as well. It's not just Russia in Syria, is it? Iran is there too.
They are the main player. They are the main player in the axis of resistance.
Hold on, Vito. Sammy, finish.
Yeah, I was just finishing off. They are the main player in the axis of resistance. If not, they are the one. Well, I wouldn't say the ones who founded it, but they are the ones who picked up the mantle after the biggest Arab power being the socialist Egypt. Being basically withdrawing and back into the American camp. They picked up the mantle there. So they are the main player in the axis of resistance, and therefore the axis of resistance is on the front line of the it's basically on the front line of this against imperialism with this new emerging multipolar world order. So yeah, go on, Vito.
So I think the Iran-China military cooperation, they signed a 25-year comprehensive cooperation agreement last year. So this is more like the beginning of how Iran, like the both countries, willing to extend hands to to learn each other with the military hardware, military tactics, and doing Navy drills, and I think that would enhance that. Not necessarily going to when there's a particular crisis comes, or something that would really help them engage that threat directly, but it's more like as both countries have been developing with their own military hardware and also like arms import exports, and that would really just go to get the and more enhanced like increase the defenses against malicious
Collective
attacks.
West.
Yeah, particularly Iran when it comes when the attack came out of
It would be
Israel.
nice. It would be nice
Yeah.
to see like the Chinese Navy defending Iran, wouldn't it? Around Iranian waters, like
Operation.
as a cooperative effort, because
That's
why
the
not?
thing though. Like
Why waste
I think-
money and effort building two different? The world can just cooperate again. Is that not internationalism, right?
Absolutely.
Like, what's the point in building two different armies when you just cooperate against it?
There's
That's what the
the-
imperialist
the-
class is scared of.
Also, the special.
Go on, Sammy. You first, then Tom.
Sorry, Tom, but I just wanted to add that this is something that I keep forgetting. Friend, your straps.
Right, carry on.
Yeah, sorry about that. But anyway, this is something that I keep forgetting to bring up in a lot of streams, but it's the fact that I think one of the reasons is that Iran is so advanced technologically, especially technologically speaking, is the fact that they have experience with both Western and Eastern bloc technologies. Like, the Shah, Iran of the Shah, pre-revolution.
The Western Iran.
Yeah, Western Iran pre-revolution. They were the main US ally in the Middle East, weren't they?
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, they were getting all kinds of American technology, military hardware. 60,000 American experts were expelled from Iran post-revolution, and then after that, you had the Americans convince Saddam Hussein to basically launch a war against fresh revolutionary Iran, and then they had basically Eastern Bloc military support, including from the DPRK. The DPRK and Socialist Yemen, in fact, when Yemen was back then communist, it was one of the only two Eastern blocs to publicly support Iran. But anyway, that's a different topic. They have both Eastern and Western technology, and they have developed their own unique style, so to speak. So I think that's part of the reason why they downed that most advanced American UAV, and then both delegations from both Russia and China just flew over almost immediately, and how the hell did you do this? And my source for this is basically there's this analyst who passed away last year, or actually earlier this year. He had a really close relationship to both the Syrian and the Iranian leaderships. His name was Anis al-Naqash. In Arabic TV channels, he's very well known. So he's the one who said that, and I just think this. And on top of this, obviously, they are the central part of the axis of resistance and supporting the Palestinian resistance. And I forgot to mention that they also even have an S-400 or S-500 even equivalent air defense system. I think it's called Khordad. But anyway, go on, Tom.
Yeah, so I was just I was gonna come back to the initial point you were making about how will China react in when this world conflict eventually breaks out, because we're all waiting for it now. I mean, the first shots of this conflict are the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Eventually, it'll expand to Taiwan, and then following Taiwan, it'll probably explode all over the Middle East, as we know, and it will eventually become what we know as the Third World War. Now, what I think is China is a very forward-minded country. We all know this. This is not a controversial statement. They plan years in advance, and they know that this conflict is coming eventually. So there will be ample supplies already stockpiled for this when it eventually does happen, right? And I think that one of the most interesting things about this potential conflict when it does happen, because, as I say, I believe it's inevitable, unfortunately, because obviously war is hell. No one wants world war. But I think it's likely that we are going to see it very soon. And what I think is going to happen is not only will China be able to weather the storm because they will have already prepared in terms of vast foreign currency reserves, which we know that they already have stored up, but vast oil supplies, vast alternative oil and gas import links from Iran, from Russia, from other friendly states in Eurasia and West Asia. But one of the more interesting things I think about this, which is kind of what you two have just been saying when you're discussing kind of Iran's role in the axis of resistance, I think when the USA does eventually bring hostilities to Taiwan, if they do decide to directly get involved and it branches into a kind of full-blown Pacific war between China and the USA, then I think that is the point at which China will say, okay, gloves off, no more of this fucking, non-interference in other countries' affairs, because you've ruined that for yourselves, Western states, by bringing this conflict, bringing your imperialistic warmongering to our shores. So what I think will happen is China will start actively supporting Palestinian struggle, resistance factions. They'll start supporting revolutionary factions across the Middle East and West Asia. They'll start kind of going for more active role in the world, like Russia has done, because Russia's been very passive for 8 years, with the exception of Syria, which was kind of like the first big shock. Russia was always, let's sit back, let's diplomatically.
Just pause there for anyone listening on that point. I remember the moment when Russia vetoed Western intervention in Syria back in
2015?
No, it was before then, wasn't it?
2011.
It was like 2011 or something like
2011.
that.
Yeah, 2011.
The original intervention in Syria, because the first thing that happened was Russia just went nope, and it caused like a controversy. The West just jumped on Putin. Putin's stopping us bombing Syria.
Yeah.
It was huge news. Russia wants to control a port in Syria. That's why they're stopping us bombing Syria, because they want a port and all this. You got all that rhetoric that they've thrown at China against Russia back then. It was huge news. Anyway, Tom, carry on.
That's what I'm kind of getting at. Russia's only become so kind of, I say aggressive, but I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean that in active is probably a better word. Russia has become very active. Yes, no, not just defensive though, because what I mean is in terms of their rhetoric stances towards places like the Zionist entity, where they've taken a much harder stance in the recent recent weeks, which is a much more combative stance, which is a good thing.
Getting tested, isn't it?
And I think that this will happen to China as well when the conflict is brought to China's door.
A contradiction is always going to get tested, isn't it? And it's always going to cause that clash. And at some point,
but the West hasn't learned its lesson, is kind of the conclusion I'm making here.
It hasn't, has it? Because you're just predicting that at the minute. But when push comes to shove, if the West does put China in a position where it has to choose between the Zionist entity, right, and Russia, it's gonna choose Russia, isn't it? It just is.
Of course it is.
And the West is gonna learn another stupid lesson.
But what I was getting at when I say about learning a lesson is, I think it was Sammy or maybe Vito who said earlier that China and Russia were the two countries that both made the biggest progress towards the fighting in the Second World War, but also paid the largest costs. The Chinese and the Russian people are incredibly resilient, and they can and will do that again if it comes to it. If a horrific third world war happens, wherein China and Russia are forced to fight the collective West and their kind of fascist proxies throughout the world. They've defeated fascism once before. They will do it again. Like
on a much bigger scale than now as well, right? That you arguably Nazi Germany was a lot better equipped than the Ukraine is now, because it doesn't seem like the US Army is interested in actually entering this fight, much like it didn't last time until it was kind of needed to, does it? So they're not prepared to watch their own tanks get blown up. So
No, I think Iraq ruined any kind of direct intervention for them for the future. Like they were just. They just had their butts handed to them when they went to Iraq.
Yeah.
And I think that after that they're like, no, we're not going anywhere directly.
It was $1 trillion investment, the Iraq War, wasn't it? $1 trillion or $3 trillion investment. Like, I know we all talk about how the USA can just print money and it doesn't really care because it's got monetary sovereignty and all this kind of stuff. But eventually, all of this shit, all these dominoes will begin to fall, and when they do start to fall, it's going to come crashing down hard. And I think like that's why this is why I think America is being so aggressive at the minute with their funding of neo-Nazis, their open support for Taiwan secessionism.
They've got to be, haven't they? 'Cause you've got to try and stop it now before it's even let. They've got to that point, haven't they? If they continue to let China, Russia, Iran establish relations, then it gets harder, doesn't it? Because at some point they're going to bring in Korea, and then they'll bring in Cuba, and Cuba will have a couple of things to say about, how things should go forward. And more countries will join that alliance, won't they? And it'll become even harder for them to stop. They've got to throw the kitchen sink at it now. And the problem is for them that the kitchen sink right now is like some fucking football hooligan idiots. But in the Ukraine, they've radicalised for 10 years. Radicalised with like false ideology as well, that doesn't really exist in reality. You've made it up in order to create a war. That's literally it, isn't it? It's not grounded in reality. Whereas you're pitching it against Russian sovereignty, Russia's right to exist. It's the same as Vietnam, right? Vietnam is always the people are always going to win. The will of the people will always triumph over some like false ideology that you've created just so compradors can exist, so the US can loot it. Yeah.
And I think when this conflict does inevitably happen, I mean, obviously, I think we're in it now. To be honest, I think this is we're already living through the opening days of the Third World War. I think when people write about this period in history, depending on if we end up in nuclear annihilation or not, and there's anyone left to write about this, then like they'll be talking about how this was kind of like the first spark of the great conflict or whatever.
Like
but I think that this is going to be the final. This will be like the final conflagration, which does bring about the reunification of Korea will happen during this conflict. The complete liberation of Palestine will happen during this conflict. The reunification of China will happen during this conflict.
Just to add to your point, the Iranians said that the Zionist entity will not live to see its 80th year, which is in 2028, less than 6 years to go.
And I don't think
they say this knowing what's the reality is on the ground and what all the variables are and risk factors and such.
You just look at the speed that China is churning warships out right now. Like it's almost like a wartime production speed that they're doing right now during peacetime. Now, that in itself tells me that they're preparing for the inevitable conflict, because China knows it's coming as well. And also, what is quite shocking is that if this is the production that they're managing to put out during peacetime, like just imagine, like during World War II, the USA was known as the arsenal of democracy, right? That was the phrase it was given, because it was it supplied all of the Western states with the Lend-Lease aid. It gave a lot of shit to the Soviets. Like, I don't like to praise the USA. I'm not praising the USA, but they did give a lot of material.
Tanks,
to the Soviets, and like what we're seeing now is like a complete recalibration of that, where China is the industrial power of the world. And when this war does come, the USA doesn't have the capacity anymore to rebuild what it loses. So if it gets completely punished, if it loses all of its aircraft carriers, if it loses all of its ships, China can kind of lose an equivalent amount to the USA, and China will be able to rebuild, so that in the end China's net losses will be zero. The USA's net losses will be near 100%. And
Also,
once the USA is decoupled from, just let me finish the sentence, Sammy. Once the USA is decoupled from the world economy, because that will be they're trying to decouple from China, they're trying to decouple from Russia. In reality, the world will realize that having access to Chinese material goods and Russian raw natural materials is far more important than having access to fucking McDonald's and OnlyFans or whatever the fuck else America exports these days. Fuck all.
But I mean,
Death,
even
fascism, and
McDonald's gets
OnlyFans.
closed, and the country just nationalise it and just go, we'll continue running it. Cause
under a different name.
You were making the crappy burgers in our country anyway, so I'll just requisite that factory.
Macrominov.
And it's now Don Mac, or whatever they called it in Donbass. Don Mac.
I remember.
And there's also Crimean fried chicken.
I remember in Syria, like
that.
obviously before the war, you have
What's
like
the Russian one? Uncle.
I can't remember, to be honest, but I remember in Syria, there were like a lot of knockoffs of Adidas. They were named like Abibas or Adibas, whatever. Like it's hilarious.
The way I see it,
they're all over the place.
The way I see it is they're all made in like third world countries anyway. So what's it matter if it's a real one or not?
But also another thing, like in terms of like shifting foreign policy, I remember mentioning on previous episodes of the podcast that I think, or this is what I said a few months back. I said that when China hits 2027, that's the planned, according to their planned economy, that's when they are supposed to have the goals and aims for Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up completed. And at that point, they're going to start the new plan of building a socialist society advanced in all aspects, or something like that. Yeah, a prosperous socialist country, advanced in all aspects. And I said, okay, they're going to be done with the opening up and reform, so they won't be as reliant on international trade, so to speak. So at that point, they'll be becoming more active.
We've already
in terms of anti-imperialism as such.
We've already seen the kind of the start of this with the most recent 5-year plan. I think Vito, was it 2019, the last one, or 2020?
2021. Oh,
Is it 2021?
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, we
Okay. Well, the last 5-year plan, the most recent one that was announced, basically stipulated the importance of dual circulation. So basically having
it is
an
2021.
internal, so having an internal economy that is as important as the external economy, right? Which that sentence itself doesn't sound too important when I say it like that. It just sounds like, okay, yeah, what are you talking about, Tom? Just economies, boring. But like the bulk of China's economy today is still export driven, right? Now, if they're aiming for parity between internal markets and external markets, then that means that should a situation occur where a conflict breaks out and their external revenue is cut slightly, cut a lot presumably, then they'll still have the internal economy to fall back on. This is a massively important thing for self-sufficiency, and like you don't see or hear about anything like this from the Western countries. I mean, you look at the UK, right? The UK helped start this fucking crisis in Ukraine, with the helped the USA start this crisis in Ukraine 8 years ago, and the second that Russia goes in and all of a sudden shortages start happening, like British fucking supermarkets are empty, like they can't like capitalist class in the Western countries cannot even conceive of preparing like 2 or 3 years ahead, even when their own imperialism causes their own shortages. And it will be this kind of short-sighted capitalist profit at all costs.
They can't.
You know, overthrow anyone.
They can't even get to the point, like for example, the British government can't even get to the point where they can say, right, Tesco, by 2023 you're gonna have a meal deal that costs £2.
Yeah. It'd be ridiculous.
Yeah.
Or Walmart.
I think
You know,
to
bullets will be 10% cheaper because we've maximised the production to make it cheaper. That would be that's the opposite, right? Do you know what I mean? If the US wants to act real.
I wanna extend what Tom says. It's not just the market, the internal market, import, export, and something like that. It's also like the sort of like joint hands between rural areas and the metropolitan areas. It also relates to education. You got like the number of students who are into STEMs are really off the roof, and that has given China a huge leverage when it comes to how technology is used in domestic domestic technology, also and with the more advanced technological material that can easily help with the production of steel, production of glass, production of you name it. And I think the next thing that they're going for is the cheap manufacturing, which is mainly Taiwan's thing, right? And the United States took notice of this, and they're trying to take all their manufacturing capacity, and they wanted to deny China the extensive rights to use semiconductor chip making to stall them, to actually deny them to actually go further with with the developing technology and stuff like that mainly used for phones and other
military
not only
aircraft
phones,
as well.
not only phones, but like you say, that throws a spanner in the works of like deals with Iran and such as well, right? You know, we talked about before. Being able to sabotage those industries, because that's that imperialism is that, isn't it? Like 100 years ago, it was controlling the fucking banana industry. Now it's controlling the chip industry for military, military guidance purposes or whatever, right? It's how many satellites you can get. I mean, China the other week was saying China and Russia both accused the US of having plans for space colonization, right? Which is completely like within the realms of reality, right? Because they're the ones who, not only these days, but like for the last 50 years have talked about Star Wars programs, right? Anyone who's not listening, for everybody listening who doesn't know, Star Wars was like a anti-missile program, right? Which was seen as space colonization because it was an American satellite system that went around the entire globe as if they were like caging the globe in, right? To stop. So they could tell if the Soviets had launched a missile. That was the excuse, of course. But in reality, it's about, all kinds of other reasons for the US. Because they can, because they will, because they need to, because whatever excuse, right? Nobody can stop them. So it's the same, but today. They're never going to stop doing it until countries can stand up and act like China, act like Russia, act like Iran, act like wherever else, Cuba. A tiny little island that has managed to almost resist. There's still Guantanamo Bay occupied, of course, isn't there, and not been able to get rid of. As the march of history continues, Cuba will get to the point where they can demand the US leave, right? Because the US Navy will get stuck down in a war against China on the other side of the planet, So Cubans will take the chance to kick out the. You know, it's going to happen, isn't it? It's just that's what Marx predicted. It's Marx, and you know, that's the that's the end of history that the capitalists have always tried to stop.
It's so weird. It's so weird that you're looking at me while we're saying this.
Carry on, Tom.
Like, you know, that's what I was saying before. Like, when one domino falls, this whole house of cards is going to come crashing down because the entire.
Not only does another domino fall, though, Tom, but like one of those domino setups, it like makes the chain go off onto 3 other dominoes. You know.
Yeah.
The chain goes off to the Middle East, and it goes off to DPRK.
The U.S. empire isn't obviously just the landmass of the USA. It's, you know, it's all of the puppet states. It's all of the American military bases. It's all of the Western influence that's been improperly forced on these countries. Like, this will come crashing down, and it is probably going to be a very brutal conflict. And I think we are all going to be, you know, we're going to be the generation that lives through it. Like, you know, our parents and our grandparents all worried about nuclear war during the Cold War and did, you know, hiding under the school desk drills as though that's going to protect you from a nuke and all that kind of crazy shit. But we are probably going to be the generation that sees the final confrontation between the West and the East. And I think that, like, not to be hyperbolic or anything, but this will create the fertile conditions that are necessary for socialist revolutions to bloom all around the globe. Because, you know, how did Lenin create the USSR? He created the USSR as a result of the you know, the destroyed state of Russia during World War One. And then with China, you had pretty much a similar situation. China, Mao Zedong's army successfully managed to kind of win the civil war after the kind of devastation wrought by the Japanese in World War II. Like, Vietnam. You know, same with Vietnam, same with Cuba. It takes periods of intense struggle for great things to happen, and I'm not cheerleading World War III. I'm not calling for nuclear war. I'm not a pacifist or anything like that. But like, I think that there is a kind of a silver lining to this, and it will be the downfall of the American empire. And when the American empire falls, countries will be free to pursue their own path. You know, in a multipolar world, a true multipolar world that China's been kind of calling for the past 10, 15, 20 years now, like, we will see all of these kind of self-determination movements. They might not call themselves communist, but they'll be fighting for the people, but they'll be fighting, there won't be NED funding, getting in the way.
Even if not directly, they're a lot closer to, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, that's the point. I mean, you know, we've always said that, a quote-unquote dictator, an anti-American dictator, not that many of them exist, because most of the dictators are funded by America, but, the kind of undemocratic places like, like Syria, like Iran, like these countries that are called undemocratic, these are always superior to whatever the West would have placed in with puppet states. You know, Maduro is superior to Guaido.
Exactly. The Syrian people.
Navalny is.
The Syrian people have got a lot more participation in their political system under these leaders than they do with a comparable government. That's what you're talking about. Nothing to do with these like slurs that get. The words like dictator, etc., etc. Right? They get thrust upon them, don't they?
National unity as well, because if you look at
that's part of it. Yeah. That's part of having a political system that a country can take part in. Because just look at how ineffective it is in the West, right? You have a political issue as a citizen of a Western country, and what is the solution to your problem? How do you get in touch with a politician? They've got write to your MP, right, or write to your congressman. And you write them an email and then you get a canned response back, and that's you taking part in the political system, having a vote. I'm pretty sure it was Stalin. I'm not sure if it was him or some other Bolshevik, but one of them said something in comparison with Western democracy and socialist democracy is that when a politician is elected in the West, the moment that the election is won and they've been declared winner, that's when they become unaccountable to the electorate, right? Because they've won, So they've secured their position. Now they can start putting the interests of the capitalist class.
And you
to
see,
play.
even people
Hold
who
on, Tom.
even
And the opposite, which is socialist democracy, is that a politician only really truly does become accountable to the masses once he's been elected, because the political system is set up the other way. So a politician can be recalled at any point. We're going to have a vote of no confidence on this guy, and if he loses, he's gone. We'll get someone else in. That's how it works. So that's the difference between capitalist bourgeois democracy and socialist true people's democracy, isn't it? Now, these countries obviously that are quote unquote anti-imperialist maybe are not at socialist democracy yet, but they're also not at globalist, international bourgeois democracy. So national bourgeois democracy will always be to the left, not be superior, but will be to the left of international bourgeoisie democracy, right? Because it's the capitalist class knows that a fragmented world is easier for them to control, right? But in opposite, a fragmented world in terms of we haven't got compradors at every level, because the American dream is that every country around the world has a politician that is in the pocket of the US, right? If they can achieve that, they will be kings of the world. That's what they want. That's what a regime change is all about, isn't it? It's not about giving people democracy, really, is it? They want to put a government in charge of the Ukraine that says yes when the Joe Biden family wants to invest in the energy company in order to loot the Ukrainian energy sector, right?
When it's time for another fucking IMF loan to...
Exactly. That's all they want. So, but they also understand that in opposite, right? So it's just that, isn't it? National bourgeoisie will always, just like the KMT in China. The Chinese Revolution is a good example of that, because you would think on paper that the KMT would favour the Japanese, wouldn't you? Because they both have an interest of they're both members of the bourgeoisie, right? It's just that in that situation, the KMT favour the communists, because nationalism and sovereignty wins out over imperialism, because it's unnatural, isn't it?
Yeah.
What that phenomenon is proving Marx correct, that capitalism is unnatural to humanity, therefore it's always going to collapse.
And if you want, if you're a nationalist, for example, in a country of the third world or the global south, and you want to see your country kind of have dignity and rise up, so to speak, then the path is a planned economy and socialism, building up your agriculture, your industry, and resisting foreign intervention. And the only effective way, materially, to do that is via a planned economic system.
Well, you're a pretty shit far-right nationalist if you let your country get looted, right? Just on principle. Everything else aside, economically, if you were to do that, well, you're not really a nationalist then, are you? You're just a comprador.
Yeah,
a complete
What I find funny is, even people who are vehemently critical of China and China's government will always say, when you provide them facts and figures about how the Chinese people are generally very satisfied with the Chinese government, they'll say, yeah, well, the dictatorship has to, do popular policies, otherwise they'd be overthrown. Yeah, that's socialism.
That's
that is
7D chess, isn't it? Just
you're literally explaining socialism. What the fuck is your government doing? When was the last time the USA or the UK passed a popular policy for the people?
Right to MP. See if they take it on.
Yeah, but that's the point, isn't it? I mean, I literally can't think of. I mean, my whole life, when I was too young to kind of know politics. In the early days of Blair, so for me it was kind of my whole life has been lived under Blairite neoliberalism, and then into Tory conservative austerity rule, and then into whatever the fuck Boris Johnson's ideology is supposed to be, some kind of weird Nat-Bourge fucking pseudo-fascist fucking, I don't know, protectionism, become an American puppet state ideology. But regardless, I can't think of one policy change in my entire life in Britain that has been
Actually
popular
benefit people.
or benefited people.
Actually benefit people.
No, I'll get. You know what? I'll give them the during the coronavirus lockdowns, like the furlough scheme was good. That is the
But
one
it wasn't,
thing
was it?
I
Because
will
it,
give.
no, but it wasn't, because it still got like abused by the elite of Britain. How many cases
No, of course
at the minute
it
have, there's so much capital flight due to that. It was like completely abused by the capitalist class.
No,
just
no, I
because
know.
Just because the everyday man got a little bit too, still doesn't make it good. Do you get what I'm saying?
No, not good. But I mean, I'm comparing it to like what the USA got, which was like $1,500 from
Nothing.
Trump once,
Which-
and then like everyone else got shafted.
Harris promised Americans $2,000 a month. A month.
Yeah.
That's just
Yeah,
never
yeah,
happened.
and
Never happened. A good
that's
example of
what I'm
this.
getting at.
A good example
Like,
of this.
Wait,
hold on,
wait.
Tom. A good example of this phenomenon of like compradorship is something that has been in front of me and Sammy the whole show. Right? We've not even managed to bring it up. We've got a deck of Iraqi most wanted playing cards here in front of us.
Yeah.
Saddam
What the
Hussein, who was an American puppet and then acted as the national bourgeois and against American interests, and that's what you saw, right? He's a good example of this, where the national bourgeoisie, who is an evil like cunt at the end of the day, but he also gets the wrath of US imperialism, doesn't he? And also the people of Iraq suffer for that. But yeah, we've got a set of Iraqi most wanted playing cards. If you don't know what they are, when the US invaded Iraq in 2003, the defense agency issued every soldier that invaded Iraq with a deck of these playing cards. So in case they so they could get to know the faces of the enemy. So let's just have a look. The Jokers, they are like describing Iraqi military ranks and tribal titles. So the Ace of Spades, of course, is like Saddam himself. Number 2 is the Rashid Tan Kazim, right? He was the Ba'ath Party regional chairman for Al Anbar government. You don't even have his picture, Sammy. It's just like a blank.
He's not that famous.
Yeah. So this is like this is the second most wanted bloke in the Iraq war, and they don't even have a picture of him. This was to give to troops to identify him as well. They're walking around Iraq. You guys can't see this. It's just like a black outline of a human.
Yeah.
Crazy. Number 3 as well. Black outline of a human. Number 4, he's got pictures. Some of these pictures are so bad because they're from like 2003. But like, it's all just.
Yeah, I was wondering what was going through your head when you bought these.
Well, it's just quite funny, isn't it? It's one of those like historical quirks. It's quite funny just to see that, like, I don't know, the US would give playing cards to its soldiers as if they're gonna like bump into Saddam after having played these cards with each other whilst waiting on patrol, right? So they played cards with each other, and then it's like, oh my god, and they're holding this Ace of Spades up next to this guy, and we're like, oh, it's him. We've got him. Finally got him. Crazy, right? So they gave US soldiers this deck of cards, Iraqi most wanted. I'd like them to do. I'd like, if you're listening, Defense Department, I'd like you to do a China's most wanted deck of cards, because you would be able to buy a nice set of playing cards that have got like Xi Jinping on them and shit.
Yeah.
How good would that be? And it would have like what's he called? The guy from is it Global Times? He's
I'd like to have
he's always causing a controversy. Yeah. So they could make like a most wanted China one.
Yeah.
I'd buy that.
I'd like to buy a most wanted Iran or Syria one where they have like.
See, the Syria one would sell because Assad's a meme. So
Yeah.
you make the most wanted where Assad
Also-
is the Ace of Spades, and it would sell.
Yeah.
Selling it.
Also because how the significant part of the Iranian military is on the US infamous blacklist, so to speak.
Make a Ukraine one with Jive as the Ace of Spades.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Exactly.
It'd actually be nice if Russia made one for Ukraine, like an actual one with like high-ranking neo-Nazis, just so we could see who they are.
Yeah, but they're not even.
I'm sure they've got the
high-ranking, they're
names.
just like football hooligans. What was I going to
Yeah,
say?
but you could have all like the British mercenaries as like the Jokers.
Well, this plane.
Think of the memes.
as the Jokers. This card came out. This pack of cards came out in 2003. I mean, it's like kind of racist in a way. They've made this pack of playing cards, but America at that point was like, they were like churning out PS2 games where you like shot Bin Laden, and they'd have like a comedy game character, America's Most Wanted, where the two baddies were Saddam, and it'd have this like glorious story where he's just got WMDs.
Up until like Call of Duty, when they were having this modern warfare, whatever.
If you think Call of Duty's bad in terms of US foreign policy, those games from like the Iraq War era are far much worse in terms of being like crude.
Yeah.
A game.
I like how you can just kind of like. I like how you can kind of just see who the American geopolitical enemy of the time is by like the video game enemies. Like you know, we had all the like initially, you know, it was movies is a good one because it goes back even further. But like with I mean, even just in the time that video games have been a thing, like, you know, we had all the kind of the Counter-Strike, the Desert Storm games, all these ones which were just miscellaneous brown Arabic-looking people with AK-47s and turbans who were the enemies. And then like now, as Sammy says, with the Modern Warfare kind of style of games, like the last one of them that I played was Modern Warfare 2, and like the main antagonist is a Russian ultra-nationalist. Like, and it, I think it was Modern Warfare 3 I played, because I remember the storyline very vividly. Like, the US Marine Corps has to go and like rescue this Russian liberal puppet government from like the claws of the Russian ultra-nationalists, or the ultra-nationalists are gonna like launch nuclear strikes against the USA, and like there's all these kind of like the harkening back to the Cold War and stuff, and you can just see like that around about that time, whenever Modern Warfare 1 came out, that's like when Russia was redesignated the enemy again, and I'm sure that would dovetail with like one of Putin's recent election wins or something. Like they're so fucking transparent, and it's only a matter of time until like we've got fucking Call of Duty Taiwan or some shit. Like hopefully the fucking US empire collapses before that becomes a reality, but like I'm sure it will happen if not.
There was
it's depressing.
There's a very good video by the Grey Zone on US military complex involvement in like Call of Duty games, and it touches upon the ones that are set in Venezuela, and he also talks about the similarities between the plot line of that game and actually what the US was trying to do, which was sabotage Venezuela's power grid. You go and do that in the game, right?
I was gonna say, isn't that one of the missions?
But like I say, those are snide. Like the way Call of Duty does it is like snide, because it'll do it in a way that America are the heroes, right, fighting against some evil, and they won't really explain that evil, and it'll be done in sort of good taste, you know.
Did you know?
But hold on, but like compared to that other era when the Iraq War was going on, where they would bring out a game called America's 10 Most Wanted, and it would have like a racist caricature picture of Bin Laden on the front, right? And it would have the level would just be like a stereotype of the Middle East, yeah.
But did you know
Bin Laden, where Bin Laden wasn't even caught, right?
Not even, yeah.
And the game would be so crudely racist, but it'd just be accepted.
Not even just that, but even like very subtly, or in a very subtle manner. Even the film Gladiator, which came out before the invasion of Iraq, like by 1 or 2 years, that is like, if you look at it with a bit of an analytical mind, then you can kind of see how that was also war propaganda, because the Roman Empire was seen as this entity that was spreading civilization throughout barbaric Germania.
I will say one thing.
That's always been like the US.
Hold that thought a second. I will say one thing about this Iraqi Most Wanted playing cards. You can get them on eBay, by the way. They're very cheap because they're reproduction. But I will say one thing. If you're a fan of moustaches,
oh, definitely.
There's some absolute blinding examples of moustaches in this. They're so good. I wish you could all see this, right? I suggest, in fact, because that would be a spoiler. Spoiler free. Me and you can enjoy the moustaches, Sammy. Yeah. If you want to see this moustache, you got to buy a pack on eBay. But look at that one.
Wow, I ought to try that style. Actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is mad. Tom, I'll send you Tom Vito. I'll show you some after the show.
There's the I think one of
Another
I think
funny
one
thing,
of my
his sons.
favorites.
His sons are like the other aces.
Wait, bring up his picture. I think one of my favorites is what was his name? Aduri. This guy, Ezzat Aduri.
Oh yeah, he ended up as like an ISIS commander, didn't he?
Wait, no, he didn't.
What happened with him? I can't remember.
I know that he's. I think
I'm
one
pretty
of
sure
what-
he defected.
No. I think he's one of the. Isn't he one of the Christian, prominent Christians in the Ba'ath Party?
I'm pretty sure that guy defected to the other side
Right.
after the collapse. You have to look that up. Look
Right.
that up while we're finishing up the show because I'll look up some comments. No, look it up on your phone because I'm going to read some. We'll read some comments. Tom, what were you going to say?
Can't remember.
Oh, sorry.
You
See,
just-
you made him forget
Look
his
at that
train
one.
of
That's
thought
a good moustache.
For moustaches, yeah. You made him forget what he was going to say.
I recommend it. That guy looks like Lukashenko.
It does actually, yeah.
Right, let's have a look at some comments before we wrap it up.
Oh, that was it. I was just going back very briefly to
Go on.
the video games thing. Like, it still astounds me that there was that controversy with the most recent Call of Duty game, where like they literally took the Highway of Death, like the most notorious American war crime from the Iraq War, the Gulf War, right?
Iraq,
the Gulf
Iran,
War.
It was the Iraq. It was the Iraq-Kuwait war, right? And they bombed the.
No,
the
wasn't
Highway
it?
Death.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
The invasion of Kuwait against Iran in Kuwait, right?
It was one of the Iran wars. It was one of Iraq wars. Sorry, one of the Iraq wars. There was obviously multiple, and they literally made it so that like you're playing as a fucking some kind of CIA-backed fucking militia member. Like I think you're a Kurd, and like you watch the Russians do the Highway of Death in this like
the Kuwait Iraq war.
fake
Gulf
Middle
War.
Eastern country that they make up, and like the Russians are the evil ones, and like and the CIA is helping you achieve freedom against like the Russian occupation of your homeland. It's so fucking on the nose. Like
They just blame it on Russia.
It's
Directly. It
unbelievable.
caused a controversy though, didn't it? Like you can't. This is what
It
I
did.
mean. They can't get away with. There's only so much that you can get away with, isn't there? Like in every example, be it like countries kicking off about US involvement in whatever, there'll always be a point where a country will go, well, hold on a minute.
the one that gets me though is the thing that got like Call of Duty banned in Russia was that fucking the airport massacre mission from Modern Warfare 2, when you literally are a CIA agent committing a massacre against civilians in a Russian airport.
I like if America was not so antagonistic to the world, like games like that would probably be accepted as just pieces of fiction, but because it's always got like a meaning, because you're trying to like send a message almost, right? That's why they end up banned, and then the US will just whine about it. They'll whine about it anyway. Right, let's have a look at some comments. Oh yeah, we've read that one. Thanks for covering Palestine, not just Ukraine. Yeah, we cover everything around the world. If we see it and it needs covering, then we'll cover it. I mean, it's generally just like military stuff right now because that's just the way the world's going, as we've been speaking about in the show. But
Yeah, we try to cover like kind of every aspect of the world,
Yeah.
with the exception of the West. Really, like we
I mean,
cover the
yeah,
West
we
when it's
cover the
relevant.
West. Says the
When
guy
it's
who
relevant.
Says the guy who writes like 3 long posts about British electoralism. Like, so there you go.
I know too much about British
I know
electoralism.
exactly, but there you go. We do cover the West if it needs covering. We'll cover the whole world, right? So anyway, saw someone in Maryland in the USA get the Ukrainian coat of arms and posted it on our tattoo. Of course, they posted it on Reddit. That's why they did it for updoots. Look, guys, tattooed myself a Nazi slogan for updoots.
Internet points.
Yeah. Thanks, frienderino.
Fucking hell.
What else we got? Mental gymnastics people go through to justify Russophobia are crazy. I mean, some of those pictures of like, I've always thought some of the crudeness of the pictures that you see of like Xi Jinping and Putin, or you know, like where he's like always Winnie the Pooh, and it's a really badly drawn picture. They just make me laugh. They're just so badly drawn, they just make me laugh.
This point is just
I struggle to be offended by them anymore.
NATO is using the Ukraine armed forces as plausible deniability like they do in literally every other proxy conflict. Well, yeah, but then, eventually they just end up openly being there like they are in Syria. You just, see an American convoy on the ground. China also has always had the advantage of hindsight. They got to watch and take notes watching the US star. Well, of course, the advantage of hindsight is a very lucky thing, right? Good job it's not the other way around, because it quite easily could have been, right? I think Russia has realised that Zionist entity will always be a US-EU appendix, right? Yeah, I guess so. That relationship's definitely getting tested. I wouldn't say Russia are that against Israel yet. It's not going to happen, is it? Because of history.
probably not,
Right.
but
Probably never going to happen.
But they do know what's coming.
Yeah, exactly. They know where the bread's buttered. But I don't think they're ever
It's what
going to
we-
be
it's what we-
openly hostile.
It's what I said before. Like, I think when the dominoes really do start to fall, like, all of these relationships are going to be re-examined, to put it lightly.
Joe Biden has admitted that the US taxpayers' money goes towards funding wars and terrorist attacks. Well, of course, right? Of course.
Duh.
All money of the world is the people's, really, isn't it? Really. McDonbass is actually called Don Mac, and then the other one is Crimean Fried Chicken. And I can't remember what did Russia change its McDonald's names to?
It was like Uncle Devonka or something.
Something like
And
that.
it was like they just changed the
They just
M
flipped
round
the
to
M.
like a B.
Somebody says the footage in the background
And it's
DPRK.
cheaper as well, by the way.
Well, of course, you're not paying
Base.
tax to the USA.
Domestic produce as well.
Yeah, are those footages about the DPRK and PRC? It was the Soviet Union to begin with, and then it's been a Korea one on loop. It's just background music. When you bring up these surveys that show the CPC has a 90% approval rating, people say those responses are fake and it was done by China's government. Well, no, because the reviews, the
It was done
report
by
is done by
Harvard University.
Yeah.
Yeah, by Harvard Business, I think it was.
I mean, but they
infamous,
still do
infamous
that.
Wu Mao's,
But
infamous
he's not
Wu
wrong.
Mao's
The comment's
Harvard
not wrong.
University.
They will still deny
Yeah, I
it.
know.
Or Harvard was tricked or paid by some agent.
Just
must have
constant-
got in. There's always a
Constant
what if.
cope. Constant cope. That's all it is.
In Western democracies, people argue amongst themselves. It's the abortion issue is 50-50. Is the abortion issue a 50-50 split in opinion by interest? I can't answer that question because I'm not American and I don't really understand what that
What
is
was
about.
the
But
question? Say it
I
again.
know that making abortions illegal is a stupid idea.
What I did notice though is that people from countries with more like a lot more progressive women's rights policies than, for example, America. The liberals from those global South countries, they're like, oh no, they're white. They act like they're American, like in the sense that they don't, for example, say, oh, my country does this and that, why don't you follow this example? Or see, even a global South country does better than like Americans who make themselves out to be like bastions of democracy and whatever. Instead of that, they just act like they're a part of the liberal.
Oh, like they've
establishment
attached
kind of thing.
themselves to it.
Yeah, they attach themselves to like the liberal
But that's the
establishment
point.
in America.
But that's the point. That's just part of American like colonialism, isn't it? Is that thought that like America is the
Like
center of the world,
like cultural
their cultural
hegemony.
hegemony. Yeah, that's what it comes with. You know, watching them growing up with American culture, etc. Blah blah blah. Even just being on Twitter. If you step away from Twitter and forget that the US exists, you find that like, oh, actually, what was I so wrapped up in all that, you know, American crap for?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Let's have a look. Yeah, send weapons.
What was the question?
Send weapons to Ukraine because they've already lost. Yeah, well, what is the point? They just keep getting blown up. The question was: is the abortion issue in the US 50-50? I guess. Well, of course not. But I guess it's probably closer to that than being a big majority either way, right? because America
There's
definitely is one of them places where you've got a lot of anti and a lot of pro, and they always clash, right?
Yeah.
It's
You'll
a
never
hot
get
button
that.
issue there because they've got so many like extremely radical right wing
Exactly.
Christians.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
Like, you don't really have that problem in any European state. Like, so we can't really. It doesn't make sense to anyone from the. I mean, I'm counting Britain as European because it's on the same
Northern
tectonic
Ireland,
plate.
I suppose.
Like, we don't really have these issues. Like, abortion is just a thing that is allowed and should be allowed. Like, no one even debates making it illegal. So it's
Definitely
hard
been
for
those debates.
anyone.
Just a lot.
Yeah,
you just don't remember
With
them.
like the DUP and stuff. Like, but then again, that's again the only real case of like extreme It's Protestantism. It's all Protestantism. That's my hot take for the day.
Rav says the recent Far Cry games, the theme is clearly quote unquote not Cuba. They're grooming the next generation of Gusanos through these medias. I've not played it. I don't play Far Cry, but I guess
I played the third game where you're essentially a white dude trying
Trying to civilize the jungle peoples of a Malaysian
yeah,
island.
and a sort of thing like that, because it's sort of like weird that the jungle people, like the tribal people, picked him as like the leader of the
Messiah.
of the whole island, and then that
women on him. Coconut
there's
butters.
this really horrendous written female character who is just there to, you know, let him know that he's gonna take she's gonna give birth to him she's gonna give birth to their heir and something like that. It's
Don't
quite
spoil the game. Don't
Yeah.
spoil the game. But yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's another example, isn't it, of colonialism, I guess. That's pretty much it. That's pretty
No
much
more
it.
questions?
Apart from other people's having a chat. It's been a quiet chat this week. I mean, we didn't even advertise the show. We just went live, didn't we? Sammy just posted it.
Yeah.
So there we go.
No, you actually scheduled for a while though.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us, Tom and Vito. Have you got anything you want to say quick before we finish?
Yeah,
Happy
happy birthday to Marks. Happy belated birthday to Marks. Actually, it was yesterday that it was
Karl Marx's birthday.
Karl Marx' birthday, and yeah,
Happy
and
birthday,
also
Marx.
it's
A lot of things
also
happen in that first week of
Yeah.
May, like in terms of workers stuff.
the May
Because you've got
1st,
May
May
Day,
4th.
you've got the
Yeah.
Reichstag flag, you've got Vietnam liberation of Saigon, you've got Karl Marx's
Russian Victory
birthday,
Day.
You've got Russian Victory Day. May is a big month, isn't it? For like, you know.
But on the bit of a more gloomy side, you also have Nakba Day, which is like the catastrophe, so to speak.
Yeah, but that's only now.
Nakba.
You know, in 1,000 years' time, that it won't be. You'll still be celebrating Soviet Victory Day.
Yeah.
Exactly. It doesn't matter. You just got to let history play out, right? We're all passengers anyway, so
It'll be liberation. It'll be liberation.
we'll be long
day
gone. But
afterwards.
the people living 1,000 years in the future will have that luxury of being able to celebrate Soviet Victory Day. Fully.
Also on Liberation Day, hopefully next
Fully.
near future. Yeah.
Exactly.
Also,
and May will be
also
action packed with workers' holidays.
it's also Ramadan. It's also the Ramadan
Yes.
week. So
We were past
remember.
that actually. Yeah, we
remember-
celebrated Eid like both some countries did it Monday, some countries did it Tuesday, because according to the sign
Yeah.
of the moon.
It's in Iran. In May 4th, it's the martyrdom of Imam Ali. So yeah.
Teachers' Day, the day after that. The fifth
Sorry?
the 5th is Teachers' Day, isn't it? Because of that.
Yeah.
But anyway, Tom, you got anything you want to say?
No, not really. Nothing really to add. I don't think. We'll just obviously keep our eyes peeled for news and ongoing conflicts as the world slides further into brutality and chaos. I think times like this remind me of that Lenin quote. Is it not Lenin? It Gramsci. Antonio
Hold on,
Gramsci. Is
Go on.
the new world waits to be born. The old world is dying, and now is the time of monsters.
So
And I think
deep,
that
bro.
is. Well, tell that to Antonio Gramsci. It's not me who came up with it.
Man. Oh, why'd you pronounce it like that?
Don't speak
Nice.
Italian.
Nice. Well, Tom, in fact, before Sammy interrupted you, say that quote one more time.
It's the old world is dying. The new world waits to be born. Now is the time of monsters.
Well, there you go.
So deep.
There you go. Joe Biden.
Fuck off, Sammy.
It's Joe Biden keeps shaking hands with them as well, doesn't he? Like ghosts. Every time you see him, that's what he says. Right? Shakes hands with them. Don't forget.
I love seeing Biden footage. He's such a comedy goldmine. Is it
Yeah.
morally okay to laugh at someone who's so clearly suffering from dementia? Like if they're the leader of a global empire, what's the rules there?
I guess so, right? Why
Maybe.
not? Why not? What else does he do? He's got like the worst approval rating going, hasn't he? Nearly as bad as like British parties. So yeah, what do you expect? Anyway, don't forget we're on Patreon. If you want to join us on there, you can do. You don't have to. You know, if you're into that sort of stuff, we've got a Patreon. You get like perks for joining. Help support us. Help us keep going.
There's a mug if you want.
Isn't that just that's just you, right?
That's just what?
Wrecked.
Cheeky.
Wrecked.
Anyway, we've got a Patreon. Don't forget, if you're not in our Telegram, join on Telegram.
Share the Telegram as well.
Share the Telegram. Get your nan on it. Be like, Nan, you've got to get on Telegram.
Stop reading the Daily Mail on the train every morning.
Yeah. Be like, Nan, you've got to get in this Telegram. They post
Radicalise you, Nan.
They post hot Chinese elders doing their morning exercises, Nan. Get in there. But, thanks for listening. If you're on YouTube, thanks. And if you've made it from the start to the end, that's like 2.5 hours or something now. Go you. Share this video.
We should tell them to comment something. We should tell them to comment something if they've made it till the end. What should they comment? Yeah. Comment.
Comment, I've made it.
No, it's gotta be something secret.
No,
some
comment,
kind of
I've made it with an exclamation mark on the end, like you're proclaiming
Just
it.
say it in inshallah or something.
There you go.
Inshallah.
Comment now. Anyway, it's the end of the show. I'm gonna let this music play, and you guys are gonna keep quiet, right?
All right.
Cool. We'll catch you next week if Esh is back in action. So if Esh is back, we'll be on Thursday.
If not, then 2 weeks later with another episode. And
Well, we'll be back in 2 weeks anyway.
just
But if not,
our 2 cents on world events.
yeah. If not, we'll see you then anyway. Laters.
See you later, guys.